I really love the idea of basically turning all of my layouts into digital books. It would be a huge project, but I really love the idea of doing that. I would definitely still keep some, but maybe narrowing down what I have so it's a little bit more manageable.
Welcome to Scrapbook Your Way, the show that explores the breadth of ways to be a memory keeper today. I'm your host, Jennifer Wilson, owner of Simple Scrapper and author of The New Rules of Scrapbooking. This is episode 179. In this episode, I'm joined by longtime scrapbooker Laura Vegas to have a semi-controversial chat about our legacies as memory keepers, including digitizing pages, tossing older albums, and the projects she just can't let go of. Hey, Laura, welcome to Scrapbook Your Way.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be chatting with you today.
Yes, me too. We have connected online for quite a while now, and I'm excited to talk about this particular topic because this is something that keeps coming up. But before we get to that, can you introduce yourself a little bit and so our audience can get to know who Laura Vegas is?
Well, I'm Laura Vegas. I have lived in California all my life. I'm located in kind of central California in the Valley. And I live with my husband and one of my girls. My two girls are grown, so one's off on her own. And my younger one, who's almost 23, she's still here with us.
Very cool.
And then our puppy, who we've had for about a year and a half.
Oh, pandemic puppy. I hear a lot of those on our episodes.
Yep.
So what's exciting you right now in scrapbooking?
I haven't had as much time to scrapbook lately as I would like, but one of the things that's always exciting to me is anything pretty much that Ali Edwards makes and creates.
Mm-hmm.
Even like any of her design team, like all of them. I love everything that they do. And just the whole like story-based, idea of taking those photos and stories and just really making those the focus of the projects.
Yes. There's so much creativity in how especially her team and her biggest fans. So many amazing things that are being created these days that I would have never imagined myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I've been a long time. I mean, I have pretty much every single product, that she comes out with, her kits, her story kits. I even have all of the day in life and all of the week in the life kits, digital kits especially. And yet I've never done day in the life, but I have every single kit she's ever done. So I'm huge on her digital projects too, because I use those probably more than actual physical product these days. But
oh, interesting. I think we'll probably get into more of that in the later part of our conversation. But I think that's, digital is one way that we can be a little bit more streamlined in the stuff that we have. It has a lot more versatility.
Yes.
And, with those week in the life and day in the life products, they are very usable far beyond those projects. It's about everyday life. So I love those as well. We also like to ask our guests about your memory keeping bucket list. So what is one story that you still really want to tell but have not yet captured?
So the one that comes to mind, because I listen to your podcast quite a bit, and every time you ask someone this question, the one thing that pops into my head is my girls' graduations. Specifically, my older daughter's college graduation, and not to say that that's more special than, their high school graduations or my younger daughters, but, my older daughter graduated from college about 4 years ago, and we had gone down and I took senior photos of her, like cap and gown and all of her, everything that she had, all her little sashes and whatever you call them, stoles. And we took tons of senior photos around campus. And just so many gorgeous photos that I have, and then add to those the photos we took on graduation day and of the 2 different ceremonies and just with family and everything. And I really, really want to put those into most likely a digital, like a photo book, because I do want to be able to print like an extra copy for like her dad or for her or me or whatever. So I love the idea of doing it digitally, but that's a big one that I really want to get to at some point. And also even my girls' high school graduations, I never scrapbook them. I didn't document them in any way. And I have, all kinds of photos from graduation day, even 8th grade graduations. I have never done anything with those photos. So graduations are just one thing that constantly pops into my head when you kind of ask that bucket list question.
I love that because that's not something we've talked about a lot, but that is one of those things that we often have in life where you take a lot of photos and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's even, professional photos, whether, pose shots, whether you took those yourself or you hired someone to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There, that's a large quantity of photos. Sometimes, not quite as many as a wedding, but
Yeah.
it's up there in the quantity.
Oh yeah.
So,
And that's one reason I like the idea of the digital book, because I've always been really big into photo collages. It was kind of one of my signature things when I did the 12 by 12 layouts, was I was really big on collages and using the photo templates. So, I'm very good at working with a huge amount of photos and working them into those collages. And, so I just, at some point I'll do it. I just haven't gotten to it just yet.
sure, it can feel intimidating when you have that many photos and it's
Mm-hmm.
an important story. And that's why we have this bucket list conversation, is
Mm-hmm.
because oftentimes it's not because it's a silly story. Sometimes there are fun bucket list stories, but oftentimes it's because it's something important.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to do it justice and spend some time on it. And sometimes it's harder to get to those things. So, the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast is because you had posted something on Instagram recently
Mm-hmm.
about you did this inventory of your albums. But before we kind of itemize what you discovered from that, I'd like to share with our audience a little bit of context. So, how long have you been scrapbooking? What formats have you mostly worked in? And things like that.
Well, I've been scrapbooking for probably at least 27 years now. I started shortly before my older daughter was born, after getting married. And that back then it was Creative Memories. And I used those for, many years. And so I was always a 12 by 12 scrapbooker. And that was my main size really up until, I got into like the 6x8, other sizes, but 12 by 12 was always my go-to, and mainly layouts. I have done some mini albums in the past, but they're not really my thing. And then at some point I did get into, when I did start doing Project Life, I have done 9 by 12. So that's been my Project Life size since I started doing it in 2016. And then I also do 6x8 albums and 6x12. And those are mainly pocket pages. I have a 6x12 album that's mainly just for stories about myself, because that's kind of what I'm down to scrapbooking now, now that my girls are older. So I will kind of just go in between the 6x8, the 6x12, and then I also like to use the Life Crafted albums for those traveler notebook sized little spreads. And I can't get into the traveler's notebooks. I tried and I can't, but I can do that size and work it into those little albums. So I really kind of just vary in between those. Like I'll come up with if I have an idea, I just kind of ask myself, okay, is it traveler's notebook size, 6x8 or 6x12? And those are kind of my things now. I'm not really into layouts anymore. I definitely have a lot of layouts I still want to make, and I'm not saying I'll never make them again, but it's just not something that I've really done much of lately.
Sure. Now, I'm curious, across this whole history, was this all totally personal work, or were you involved in design teams at all? Because I just want to share that context in case some of your volume was related to that.
Yes, definitely a lot of it. I worked with design teams for probably about 15 years. And I also did magazines. So I was on the Creating Keepsakes Dream Team for 3 years. And then from that, I went straight into Scrapbooks, etc. Or not Scrapbooks, etc. Oh my gosh. Scrapbook and Cards Today. So I went straight into that team for 3 years. So I did 6 years straight of magazine teams. along with some design teams. And I was never one that was on a ton of design teams. It was always usually just, maybe 2 tops. But a huge amount of what I did was related to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, about 15 years, I think, total on working with different teams and such.
All right. So let's give us some stats on your inventory of albums.
So let's see. I knew I've done it a few times over the years. I've been like, look, here's what I got. Here's how many albums I have. But just a while ago, I went through and literally sat down and counted and wrote down everything. So I have about 105 total albums, which is a lot. But 67 12 by 12 albums. I've got 13 9 by 12, which the majority of those are actually my Project Life albums. And I also have 9 by 12 for like the girls' sports and things like that. I have one 8.5 by 11, which was just my own high school or my own school years that I documented.
Okay.
And then I have about 7, 8 or 8 by 8 and 9 by 9 albums. I did those for a little bit here and there. And then 5 6 by 12 albums and 10 6 by 8. And then a couple little life crafted ones. So, but yeah, 105 total, which it's a lot.
Yeah. So I'm curious how doing this inventory, and you said you've done it in the past as well. How does it make you feel when you do that?
It feels good to know that I have so much documented, but it also is overwhelming because I am one that I'm really big on like organizing and reorganizing and I'm kind of always in that look, okay, I don't need this anymore. I'm kind of, I got to purge this. I got to clean this out, kind of, paring down things here and there. And, I do kind of think like, okay, what's going to happen years down the road? My girls are not going to want 105 albums. Like, I know them. They are not going to want that many albums. They're not even going to want like half of that if they split them. So I do kind of think about, okay, down the road, like what's going to happen to all these? And really, like, is all of that necessary to have? I'm not going to like just throw memories away randomly, but I know there's plenty of things in those albums that probably don't need to be kept. It could be design team pages I made that maybe don't really have any meaning to them. But yeah, it's a lot. And I just know that at some point, like what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, that was one thing that I was thinking about is that particularly in the older days when it was more photo and product focused versus story focused, I'm sure there's pages you have that don't have a lot of additional context or they're not really adding value to the overall story. They're just pretty.
Yeah. And I think even looking back, like we used to, I know like creative memory wise, I used to put every single photo I took on these pages and all they had was like a little caption under each photo, which was kind of how we did it back then. You'd have 5 photos of my daughter, sitting in her high chair eating when she's a baby. And under each photo I'd have like, oh, she's so cute. She's holding a spoon. Like it's nothing that important where I could I may have 20 layouts of her sitting in a high chair eating where I could pull like one photo from each layout, put them together on one page and actually maybe have a better story.
Yes. Well, have you thought about actually doing that, like more kind of consolidation type projects?
I have. I've actually thought about it. And years ago, I I think I actually put that as my goal at some point. I would love to take my creative memory albums because I have a lot of pages that like the photos are on there, but I never finished them. I have albums with just pages and pages of just photos because I didn't do anything else with it. And, of course it's a little trickier because back then, we cut them into shapes. They're circles and ovals and hearts and things like that. But I would love, I have 4 albums from my older daughter's first year of life, which is ridiculous. So I would love to pull out the photos and just kind of work them into some other format. My thinking is kind of like that whole pocket page Project Life kind of way of doing it. Maybe break it down by the month or whatever, and just kind of, hit the highlights. But yeah, I mean, it's an overwhelming idea to take those albums out and pull it all apart.
It is, it is. I think that's what stops people from doing it, even if there's more of us than we talk about who are
Mhm.
actually thinking about this. So now I'm curious, when you were kind of doing this inventory, you had to actually look at things and maybe even physically touch some of them to figure out what you have.
Mhm.
Were there any things that surprised you about
Um,
quantity, quality, how things have lasted over the years,
I
things that you've
didn't.
chosen to do or not do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't actually really go into the albums and look at them. I have done that though in the past though, because there have been times where I've reorganized my albums, whether it was sorting out the layouts and working them, like separating them into different albums. Like I'm sure at some point they were all in one, and then I separated, like, okay, all of Alyssa's pages with just her go in her album, Sarah's go in hers. Here's the family layouts. And then I've also changed albums. So I used to have postbound albums, and then I moved everything over to the 3-ring albums. And every time do something like that, I weed some layouts out. So I've definitely pulled layouts out that I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. Or maybe I scrapbook that photo on 3 different layouts and there's no reason for that. So anytime I go through my albums, I will actually pull layouts out and kind of just chuck them or get rid of them or whatever I do with them. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely some albums. I know I have a couple, which they're not travel albums because we've never really traveled much, but they were kind of like places we went. Like
Mhm.
we used to go to the cabin every summer, my uncle's cabin, and they're just photos slipped in pockets. It's just, there's nothing else to them. And, those could be somehow worked into something, smaller and put into the family album so that I don't have these albums with like, oh, here's all the cabin in this album, where I could just go work them into each year that they apply to.
I think one thing that's standing out to me is the sense of permission that I hope we're kind of communicating to the listeners, that it's okay to change things as you go,
Mhm.
to improve, to make it more future proof and whatever
Mhm.
that looks like for you. And it's not so precious that you can't adjust.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. I
Because in the
mean,
end, yeah, nobody's gonna want 100 albums
no.
or more, or even, even 50 of those. It's so hard to think about what somebody would do
Mhm.
with all of that volume when
Mhm.
they're making their own memories.
Yeah.
So, it's a real, you know, mind-bending question
Mhm.
for all of us as scrapbookers.
I mean, I even had one just recently. I have a 6x8 album that I started. I picked up and got back into reading about 2.5 years ago. So I started like a reading album so I could have,
Mhm,
all of the books that I've read. And originally I had a page for each book. So I had a photo of the book. I had a journaling card of sorts, not really a review, but just kind of a card that said something about the book. And then I had like a little filler card. And then I had a card that had the number, like, this is my 5th book of the year.
mhm.
And it was fun and it was cute. But at some point, I realized that I was only going to fit, I think it was like a year and a half into one album. And I'm like, wait, hang on a minute. Like, I'm only a year and a half in and this isn't working for me. Like, that's going to be too many albums. So I actually went through and I took out the number cards and the filler cards. And now I just have the photo of the book and the journaling card, and that's it. And I make a little title page for each year. But, I was only a year and a half in, and I'm like, wait, this isn't going to work because it's going to be way too much if I keep reading. So now I pulled out all those cards, threw them in the garbage, and just condensed everything down a little bit. So yeah, I think it's definitely okay to change, to be like, okay, wait, this isn't quite what I want it to be, or it's too much, or maybe it's too little and I want to do more with it.
Yeah, I love that because it's not, there's certainly examples, which we might share in a second here, about when you are kind of scrapping everything.
Mhm.
But sorry, that's a wrong term to use in this conversation. When you're like literally when you're disposing
Yes.
or discarding items. But that's just a tweak in order to adjust the project to
Mhm.
make it work better for where you're at right now.
Yeah.
And I think some of those are sometimes even easier to wrap your brain around and feel more comfortable with. It's kind of like a baby step
Mhm.
into into this.
Uh-huh.
But you also mentioned, and really it was the photo of this post where you talked about your inventory, that you combined 150 layouts into one 12 by 12 photo book. And this, you
Mhm.
had done this in years past. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit more about that project?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I can't even think how long ago it was, but I did daycare in my home for 17 years, and I used to make tons of layouts about all the kids I watched. They were huge parts of our life. But at some point I realized I can't remember how many it was. It's in a blog post somewhere, but I had like this huge amount of albums that were just daycare kids from over the years. And I kind of said, well, I already have this many albums of my own family. I don't necessarily need to take up space with all these albums for children that basically they're not my children. And a lot of them have moved on. Some we keep in touch with, some we don't. Like, I don't need to keep all this space for that memory. I'd rather fill that space with my own families. So I did decide to I turned all of the layouts, in fact, into a digital book. And I literally took all the layouts out of the albums, photographed each one, just the same way I photographed all my layouts at the time. And then just kind of, edit them and organize them in a way so that I could just pull them right into a book. I printed them as a 12 by 12 book. And a lot of those layouts were actually 8 by 8 size layouts because I was kind of into that size for a while. But I printed them as a 12 by 12 book. And, the book is, I don't know, maybe a half inch thick. I mean, it takes up so much less space than all
Yeah.
of those albums.
So I have a collection of 4 albums of all digital pages that I had printed,
Mhm.
from, like, right after I got married to up to when my daughter was born,
Uh-huh.
and I was on digital teams at that point, and so I was using a lot of product. I wasn't doing a lot of journaling, and I've already decided these are all gonna go in a photo book because
Mhm.
they're taking up, a whole cube in my Kallax for
Uh-huh.
these layouts that they just don't have a lot to them.
Mhm.
But now if I put it in a book, I can add some, like, additional context. Just even a couple pages of journaling
Mhm.
will make it more, useful and valuable to the end reader, if it's my daughter or one of my stepsons
Mhm.
or who else in the future. So yeah, projects like that really, I don't know, they really excite me because we don't have infinite space.
Yes, yeah. And at the time, I took all those layouts. I still kept some of them. I didn't get rid of all of them. I think I
Okay.
still have 3, or no, I think I still have 2 albums that are just like the daycare kids. But I kept the layouts that were a little more special, or I kept ones that, instead of just like one child on it, I used to do these layouts where I would take a photo of every child that I watched and combine them on one layout, that had
Mhm.
more meaning to it because I had more journaling about, what they meant to me and that kind of thing. So I have a handful of layouts that I kept, but the rest of them I just kind of sorted out and I gave them to the families. I don't know if they kept them or not. Some of them I know they did, but and if there were any children that we weren't in touch with anymore, I threw them in the garbage and I was okay with that. So, yeah, I mean, I loved it. I was so excited when I got that book and I'm like, this is just one little book on my shelf and
Yes.
I love it.
Well, and I love that you could pass some of them on.
Mhm.
I think that can relieve some of the heartache of all the investment of time and energy and money and products and everything that we put
Mhm.
into our pages if we're going to decide to let them go. Um, I I don't know. Have you ever like taken apart a layout and tried to save anything, or do you just let it
Yeah,
go?
I've thrown layouts away before. I have. And
Yeah.
I'll put it out there too. Whether it's Instagram or, before Instagram, my blog or whatever. I'm like, yeah, here's these layouts and I threw them all away, guys, and people came at me like like, how could you do that? Save them for your girls. I'm like, no, like my girls already have all these albums. Why am I going to save these? And then people would say, well, give them to the grandparents. I'm like, the grandparents don't want them. And well, give them, somebody else can use that layout. I'm like, no, 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 no. But yeah, I would tear off like any embellishments that I wanted to keep. I was a big button fanatic. So I'd take the buttons off the layouts and save those. Um, You know, and now if I were to get rid of layouts from years ago, I would definitely pull off those photos. Anything that was a film photo, I would save just because
Okay.
those are so much harder to reprint. And because my girls are, I always call them my film babies because, the first, 6, 10 years of their life was on film. So, I mean, I have all my negatives and I can honestly, I don't know where you go to reprint anything these days, but anything that if I get rid of anything that has a film photo, I will take that and save it just in case.
Okay.
Just because it's not as easy to access as my digital stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a helpful tip for somebody who may be thinking about going back
Mhm.
and doing this. I'm curious if you're thinking about doing any more projects where you photograph or scan layouts and put them in a photo book.
I am. I'm actually thinking about doing it with all my layouts. Um, well, I shouldn't say all. I mean, like my Project Life albums are some of my favorite albums these days. So those can stay as they are. I have one album for each year. That's fine. Um, I have like my girls' school albums. They each have 4 albums that contain a wide mix of everything from their school years from kindergarten through 12th grade. So those will stay as is. But basically any layouts. I really love the idea of basically kind of turning all of my layouts into digital books. It would be a huge project, but I really love the idea of doing that and then potentially, I don't know if I would just get rid of a lot of layouts. I would definitely still keep some, but maybe narrowing down what I have so it's a little bit more
Mhm.
manageable. And even, I kind of look at it too, like if I turned all of my layouts into digital books, and even if I kept some of those albums or kept, narrowed it down and kept a handful, even knocking down my 105 albums down to like 50 would be amazing. But
For
even
sure.
that, you know, heaven forbid something happens to me or down the road or whatever, my girls could have, I think it would be okay to say, you can toss those albums because look, you have these digital books and they don't take up much space. And, it would be easier to just chuck everything else if they wanted.
Yes. No, I mean that makes sense. I think having that kind of digital duplication can be helpful
Mhm.
as people are making decisions in the future.
Mhm.
Now, I'm curious about the school year books and why you don't feel compelled to do the same with those. Because to
Well,
me, that seems like a really clear boundary, like time frame,
um,
a specific project.
well,
So
I
I'm
guess,
just curious.
yeah. Well, I think because they're not really layouts. They're just, I used Becky Higgins' school year kits, which was
Okay.
something from forever ago. And that's one project that I have those done start to finish. And I set up that school year album system that she had, and I didn't use it necessarily exactly like she had it, but each year has a big old envelope, 12 by 12 envelope page where I've slipped in like a sampling of their work. When they were younger, like a drawing, or it could be a report they wrote, writing samples, things like that. I have their report cards. I have their any awards they received. I have their class photo. I have any, once they got to high school, I have, any of their sports teams, the photos and any awards. I have ribbons from things. I have their ID cards slipped into the little
Mhm.
pockets. So, it's just a lot of it's more memorabilia than anything. I don't really have layouts in there. The only photos in there are like their school photo and their class photos and sports photos and things like that. But I don't know that they're going to want to pull out and be like, oh, look what I wrote in 6th grade. But if they want, it's there.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that it's definitely a different type of digitization project
Hmm.
versus photograph a layout, edit the layout, put it on a page,
Hmm.
full page, like and repeat the process for the layouts. So
Yeah.
something like that would require a lot more some scanning, some photography, some,
Yeah.
figuring out how it's all gonna fit together, and
And I mean,
so
I
I can
have
see
seen
that
Becky.
being
Yeah.
quite different,
I've
so
seen Becky Higgins do that with her kids' school stuff.
Mhm.
She a couple years ago, she was doing, I think, what her oldest son or something, and she was showing how she was doing that. So she was doing it more like scanning the artwork and taking pictures. And some of that stuff I actually did. I took pictures of the artwork, the bigger things, and I tossed those and just included the photo. But yeah, she's done stuff like that where it's all just digital pages that then got printed, I'm assuming. Uh,
Yep, yep, for
yeah, that
sure.
would be, to me, it would just be a lot of more work because it's just little
Mhm.
papers and things like that.
Yes. So I was like scrolling back further on your Instagram, and as you said, you've blogged about these questions before,
Mhm.
but you actually shared that you were tossing this big stack of mini albums that you had made for your parents.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk more about that choice and what led to that?
Yeah. So my parents moved out of state last summer, and basically my mom didn't want to take any photo albums or anything of that sort. So she kind of just gave me everything she had. And well, my brother took his, and then I took the majority of the stuff. And she had all these mini albums. I used to be big on making them like years and years ago. Like every Christmas, we had three sets of grandparents. So I would make three little 6x6 albums. And or even before that, I think it was like the 5x7 creative memory albums, I think. And it literally just had like two photos for each month, like one of Sarah, one of Alyssa, like my favorite photo. And it was really just a collection of photos from throughout the year. There was no journaling, there was no real story. Like some of them just literally had just a photo and maybe like January, February. And then I also used to teach classes at the local scrapbook store forever ago. And I used to do these mini albums, different kinds too, like way back when we used to do mini albums out of brown paper bags, brown lunch
Mhm.
bags. And so I did a class with that. So I have just a sampling of photos, and then I used to print quotes because it was just easy when you're teaching a class like, here, put these little quotes in, that's cute. Um so yeah, most of these albums, they didn't have anything in them. There were no stories, there was no real special meaning. It was mainly just a handful of photos in an album. So looking through them, like I took them all from her and took them home, and just looking at them, there was just, to me, there was honestly no reason to keep them. I mean, it's cool to be able to pull something out and be like, yeah, look, I made this album out of a paper bag. Um, but it just, I just didn't see any point in keeping it, to be honest. So yeah, I went through, I took a lot of those because they were so old, were film photos. So I took all the photos off and saved those, but I just kind of threw everything away. And the thing is, I actually have a lot of these albums. I have duplicate, like I have my own album that's the same
Sure.
exact one because I would make my own. So at some point, I probably will pull mine out. I have a couple mini albums that actually have, like I had to do one for a magazine assignment a couple years ago, and it actually has more meaning to it because as I got further down the road in my scrapbooking towards the end of doing all that design team stuff, I really focused more on making things that were authentic and had meaning. And I was big on journaling. So anything I made later, it actually, I have a couple little albums that do have like a story to them and meaning to them. So I would be more inclined to keep those. But the ones that are just some photos, I just honestly, I don't feel like I need to keep them for anything.
And things like that. One of the things that I'm thinking about a lot these days is that I'm okay with just having a photo of that thing to say
Mhm.
like, "Look, I made that.
Uh,
I didn't need to keep it," or it's something even my daughter made, or, I just threw away some colored pencils that I bought in 1991 when we went to England,
mhm,
and I've been saving them all these years, and my daughter's like, "I don't want those, mom. Those are old. I
mhm.
have new ones." And so I'm like, "Why am I keeping these?" So I took a picture and I moved on. I
Uh-huh.
don't I don't need to these don't need to take up space in my life anymore,
Yes.
and I can see that with those albums,
Mhm.
how there's a similar feeling.
I mean, I even have some albums that my girls like. they never got into scrapbooking, but when they were younger, they would do a little bit with me. And I have a
Mhm.
couple little albums where they're like, their little selves pasted down some photos and some completely random stickers and wrote some
Yep.
just funny little captions. So that would, and I have kept those because I'm like, oh my God, I can't throw them away. But yeah, that would be a good idea for that, would just be to take some photos of them.
Yeah, and maybe someday that'll go into some sort of compilation book, but
Yeah.
for now, it can just be a photo of a thing that, can be let go of, so.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you mentioned at the beginning you haven't been as creative this year as, maybe you would have liked or you have in the past.
Hmm.
How is your creative momentum going at this point in the year?
It's really not going anywhere. Oh, it's been a struggle. I'm not sure what's going on. Um, yeah, I actually feel like a lot of it is, I for so many years I worked at home and I did daycare, so I had little infants and little toddlers, and they kept me busy. But I always, I was at home, so I always could find like these little pockets of time where I could do little things. And, they're little kids. So I'd have stuff up on the counter that nobody could even see or reach. And I could just do
Yeah.
something little here and there for 5 minutes. I had nap time where I could work on stuff, for an hour or two. Um, and now, I'm back to working outside the home, and my schedule, the hours I work just make it really hard to get anything done. It's something I am constantly griping about. Others at work gripe about it too. Where like there's just, it's like I work that kind of like 12 to 9, 1 to 10 type shift. And there's not enough time in the morning, but there's not enough time at night. And I just struggle to get much of anything done these days. And I can't figure it out. I'm like, I know it's my schedule, I think, but I just, it every day it bugs me that I'm like, why can't I get anything done? But it's just been a little trickier to find that creative time.
For sure, and we all go through seasons of life. It probably won't be like that forever.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, and I think it's a very normal thing, especially when we're in this. I don't want to call it post-pandemic yet,
Mhm.
tail end of the pandemic, whatever, wherever we are right now, where we're out there doing things, yet there's still COVID out there.
Mhm.
We're all trying to figure out what life is like now, and yeah, I think
Yeah.
having some shifts in your energy and momentum has been very normal for a lot of us, particularly those who maybe had extra time at home when we were told to stay home, and then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, oh no, sorry, you need to go back out into the world every day and have no time left for yourself.
And
So
maybe that's it. Like I didn't get any of that extra time. I I worked
okay,
well, I didn't get to experience, that whole pandemic thing like a lot of people. Um, I worked the entire time and I worked outside the home the entire time. So I've never done like a Zoom meeting. I've never gotten to do, I kind of felt like I missed out on some of that because nothing really changed for me. I still went to work every day. And there was a point where I was working more than ever. And it was, I mean, I work in, retail, grocery, warehouse, I mean,
hmm
it was crazy. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just really tired after the last 2 years.
well, particularly with all of the supply chain issues and shortage of
Mhm.
bleach and toilet paper, and then
Oh,
now it's
yeah,
like random things that we can't find, and
exactly.
when whatever random spice or there's always something nowadays that doesn't
Yeah. I'm always
exist.
like, you can't have that. There's a limit. You get one.
Yeah. So maybe it's just like kind of just collective exhaustion
Yeah.
from just the stress on top of the stress you already had.
Well, and I mean, to be completely, transparent, I have just some stuff going on, just in
Okay.
life too. And
Sure.
it's been a little overwhelming and a little stressful. And I just have a lot of stuff in my head. Like my head never stops thinking. So, when I just have all these things that I'm trying to kind of work through and figure out and all that. And it just has kind of sucked the creativity out of me. So, even when I do have time, like on my day off, and I find that some days I still don't do anything because
Mhm.
I can't get my act together. I have so much that I want to do. I don't know. In some ways, I've kind of accepted. I'm like, it's okay. like you said, seasons of life, you know, we all go through these different periods, you know, where it's not going to be like this forever. And, you know, maybe later this year it'll change. Maybe it'll be next year. I don't know. But I remember saying last year, I think I said it on an Instagram post at some point, but I was like, you know, as long as I do my Project Life album and I keep up with my reading album, and then every year I also make, I have like a TV show album type. Well, I don't know what you want to call it. I don't know what I want to call it. It's like my TV album that every TV season I make these pages to go in there of all the shows I watch, because I'm a big TV junkie. So as long as I do that and make my TV pages for the year, like I'm good. You know, I'm okay with that. If I don't get to any other projects throughout the year, like I'll be okay.
I think that's a really healthy perspective of knowing kind of what your minimum is, because, you know, sometimes we do have to push through a little bit because it's important to us, even when we're not as excited about it. And maybe there's something else out there right now for you that will fulfill kind of the creative outlet side, that isn't as, I don't know, emotionally connected. Like that's one of the weird things about scrapbooking is that it's not like knitting where you're making something. It's about our lives. And if our lives have some complications to them, we don't always want to spend our time dwelling in that. So maybe you need to do some knitting or painting or something to find creative joy again.
I'm a big organizer, so I've been doing a lot of that around the house.
Yes, I saw your pantry and I'm like, I wish I had a closet that I could turn into a pantry like that.
My family's still torn over my pantry, but that's okay.
I'm a big fan of those tall Alex drawers. I have one in my bathroom that holds all the things.
So. Oh, I have the short ones in my scrapbook room and on, you know, a desk area that I have. But yeah, I love the drawers.
Yes.
But yeah,
I wish they pulled out further though. Like if they could fix that problem of how far those drawers pull out, that would be really amazing.
It'd be nice too if you could easily move them around.
Yes.
Like I know you can unscrew them and move them, but that's a lot of work. So I shifted some in my scrapbook room quite a while ago. I moved a few things around to make room for bookshelves, and I kind of had to shift where I sat in my room. So I wanted to move everything in like 3 Alex drawers to the other side. And I literally had to dump out everything from the drawers because I couldn't just pull the drawer out and swap it into the other unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
it is what it is.
Yep.
So, okay, kind of starting to wrap up here. You mentioned that you also are working on a redo of a 2016 Project Life album. Basically, you sound like you're taking it all apart and kind of putting it back together in a new way. So what are some things that you're doing to make that album more finishable for you?
Well, I pulled it out because I recently switched all my Project Life albums into new albums. And I know I still have, I want to say 2017, I still have like 2 months to finish. All my other albums are completely finished on Project Life. But 2016, I pulled it out and I was like, oh, geez, you know, it's just photos. I never did anything else. That was the first year I decided to, you know, really do Project Life. And all the photos are there. And I think maybe 5 months had filler cards that I just randomly put in all of the pockets. And that was it. But that was when, you know, that was the year I wanted to do Project Life. I always resisted it because I just didn't feel like I had enough photos. But that year I decided I was going to go back into it and I want to do 9x12. Well, I cut down a 12x12 album into a 9x12. And instead of going out and, you know, I just didn't want to go buy all those 9x12 page protectors because Studio Calco was the only option back then. So I took all of my 12x12 pocket pages and I just cut down anything that could cut down to 9x12 or smaller. So I just trimmed them. So I had a lot of like 6x12. I had 8x12. I had 4x12 and a lot of square pockets. You know, and back then, I think back then you could only do square photos on Instagram. So that's how I took my photos. I took them as squares. So I love the square photo, but I realized, I mean, I had a 9x12 page on the first week. I didn't use the actual 9x12 until like week 15. So it was just all these completely random sizes of pages. So I just decided, you know what, I'm going to work it into a real 9x12. The same thing I've been doing for the last 5 years. That's what I'm going to do. So, I took out my real 9x12 pocket pages and I just kind of reworked them all into that. A lot of the square photos I had to cut down to 3x4, trim those. But yeah, I mean, I put all new weekly title cards. And I think my thinking for this one is to do my journaling cards really simple. I always do digital journaling cards. I type them in Photoshop, and I'm just going to make these super simple. I'm just going to type some journaling, and that's it. I'm not going to use the digital stamps that I always use or digital journaling cards. It's going to be 3x4 white cards, and I may even put like journaling for 2 photos on 1 card or something.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But yeah, just make it quick and easy and kind of get it, like the photos, they've all been reworked into 1 album because it was in 2 albums. So they're all in there. I have new weekly title cards, and it's kind of like I showed it to my older daughter, and of course there's photos of like her old boyfriend and she, her ex-boyfriend, and she's like, oh my God, don't put those in there. I'm like, but that was our life then,
Yeah.
And she goes, I can't even look at that. But it was exciting to look at it for me. I'm like, I love looking back. And this was like when she was in college, and my younger daughter, I believe it was her senior year, 11th or 12th grade, and all the little daycare kids that were from years ago. And I mean, it was really cool to look back at all those, those photos. And some of them, I'm like, okay, what is this? Is this photo even worth keeping in here? It's kind of like random photos, but I scrolled back on my Instagram all the way back to 2016. And I'm like, no, that photo has a story with it. So I'm going to keep it.
Well, that's one of the things social media can be handy for, is remembering why something was important back then. So I definitely appreciate it for that. Particularly, like, I'm not good at keeping a journal or keeping written records of everything. Like, some people are amazing at that and it comes by it naturally, but I rely on any breadcrumbs I've left myself or social media to figure things out like that.
I say that like everything's up in my head. I don't have anything, which is scary because like it doesn't all, like I don't remember the stuff I think I'm going to remember as well as I think I'm going to. But yeah, I don't keep journals. I don't keep notes on anything. It's just kind of all hopefully from memory. But when I work on my Project Life album, I rely on my Instagram hugely. I pull it up on my computer, and, so much of my journaling in my Project Life comes straight from Instagram.
Well, you've already done the work, right?
Yeah, the journaling's already there. I copy and paste it. That's why, that's when you pull it up on your computer, I just copy and paste it, go into Photoshop and, put that on my journaling card, and there you go. So I use Instagram definitely. I mean, when I'm working on my Project Live, my Instagram's open and Photoshop's open, and that's how I do the majority of my cards.
So when I did an album for my husband last year, and I did all white cards and we just did like paper strips as embellishments, like it was super simple and minimalist. And I actually did it in Word, and I use Photoshop every day, but I did it in Word in part so that he could help with the journaling, and I could like put a bunch of stuff on a page. So whether you're using Word or Photoshop or whatever you want to use, I liked being able to print more exact size that way, and then just trim them out versus doing the 2 up on a 4x6, because then sometimes the centering can get a little weird on that, even when you set no expansion. So
yes. Well, because I print, I do order my photos every month. I use the free prints app on my phone, and because I use so much digital products, most of my filler cards in my Project Life albums, they're all just photos. They're digital ones that I put 2 on a 4x6, 2 3x4s. But yeah, it does bug me sometimes because I'll get them, and when I trim them all in half,
Yeah.
I've learned that like this side, like if there's a quote or something, like a lot of Ali Edwards, her journaling cards, they've got this nice quote, and I have to learn to put it on the right side because, well, maybe not the right. I think it's the left side because the other one, it's always going to trim off a little extra. It's not going to be actual 3x4.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I think it's important to just know the expectations, even if something is like, needs to be tweaked. Like my printer prints too yellow, so I have to like turn on the yellow on it all the time and things like that. So as long as you know what changes you need to make or what expectations, then you can get a good result. So
Oh, no, I was going to say that's, why I think my whole approach to Project Life too, I see so many designers that do these amazing Project Life spreads and pocket page spreads and using all the fun embellishments and all that. And mine is literally photos, filler cards that they're all printed on photo paper. I just order them with my photo orders and journaling cards. I don't have any embellishments in my albums of any kind. And, that's like, even right now, I just shared something, I think yesterday, that, it's the middle of June and I don't even have anything done in my Project Life album this year. My photos are there. And I have printed, I think I've done about 40 journaling cards so far, but I don't worry too much about getting caught up because like, I know it's easy enough to do because I keep the process so simple and it's so basic for me. Like I've followed the same format and the same way of doing it for years and I haven't changed anything because it works.
I love that. That's what we all need to probably do more of. So stop changing everything. So, is that your primary focus right now? Is just kind of doing as much as you can when you can on Project Life? As you said before, you kind of talked about if I just do these things, but I'm curious, like where do you want to be at the end of this year when it comes to your memory keeping?
Well, I mean, I really do want to get back to doing other projects. I think it was about 2 months ago, maybe I had a week off, a week of vacation. So I actually did like, I think 3 little projects and it was the only thing I've done all year. And it was nice to get back in there. It felt really good. It was just like completely random little stories. And I have so many things that I want to do. So I'd really like to get back to finding that time to just, make simple projects. They don't have to be, I've definitely simplified my style. I'm loving the pocket pages and, no matter what size I'm doing, I love the pocket pages now and I don't have to make it complicated. I mean, if it's a layout, that's going to be different. I might get my silhouette out. I'm going to do maybe a photo collage and die cut my title and all that. But, I'm really focused on more just simple things like a photo, a journaling card, slip a couple other cards in and call it done. And I miss that because I have a lot of projects that I really do want to do. And I have projects that I just want to finish because I have definitely some album projects that are partly done and I just need to go back to them. But I also know that like the way I approach Project Life, I do it monthly now. And I include pretty much all our photos. I don't limit myself to like 2 spreads for the month. I've never limited my Project Life. Even when I did it weekly, if I had to have, 2 spreads for 1 week, I'll do it, and now I average about 5 spreads per month. But it's important to me to get all the photos in there. And almost every photo has journaling of some kind. And that's why I don't feel like if I don't do anything else, I'm okay with it because all the photos are there and they all have stories. And there's definitely some I can pull out and expand on. I also love to kind of pull photos from different things, to kind of tell maybe a different story. But I feel good knowing that like the photos and stories are there. So
Yes.
if I don't have time right now to maybe expand on things or do other things, that's okay with me. I know I will get to it, but I really, really miss just being in there and being creative and playing with, products. And, I go in my room and I look at stuff and I'm like, okay, I'll be back for you.
Well, I love that we have the options today to have some sort of balance, so that we can feel like we are moving forward with simpler projects, and that when the right time and place comes to spend more time on it, when you have a vacation, when you
Mhm.
have something else, you can invest a little bit more time and energy into it. So
Mhm.
I know that I'm thinking about, my cart is full of some Halloween products right now. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, I just did last year a whole, basically, it was kind of a 6x8 mini album of my daughter's first 10 years of Halloween.
Oh,
So
how
really
oh, I
it's all
love that.
captured, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, no, there's more stories. I could always, expand
Mhm.
more on it. But if I never did another Halloween layout,
Uh-huh.
I'd also be fine.
Yeah.
So, well, Laura, this has
Mhm.
been so fun. Thank you for sharing so openly and about, a wide variety of your hobby.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Can you share where we can find you online, and if there's anything you have new or coming up in the future?
Well, I don't have much of anything coming up. Hopefully, I'll have some projects to share here and there. I've kind of stepped back from the whole design team and all that. It was just, it wasn't coming as easily to me. So I just kind of
Mhm.
stepped away from that. So in some ways, I kind of feel like, oh, I'm not really a part of all that anymore. But yeah, I mean, hopefully I'll be having some projects to share. And I love to, my Instagram is more of a random one anyway. It's not just going to be scrapbooking. It's going to be my puppy. It's going to be organizing or my house or whatever. But yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram, just Laura Vegas. I do have a blog still, and it's still there. I only post when I have something to share, but
Sure.
I know blogs aren't as big of a thing anymore, but I feel like it's kind of my little home base. And
Yes,
if something
yes.
ever
I miss the
happened
days of
to
blogs.
Instagram or whatever, like at least my blog has everything I have ever made. So yeah, I have that.
Well, that's incredible. We will include all of your links in the show notes to this episode. And to all of our listeners, please remember that you have permission to scrapbook your way. If you're like me, this episode got you thinking, but it doesn't have to end here. You can find insightful and even semi-controversial conversations, just like we have on the podcast, inside of our membership community. Visit simplescrapper.com/membership to learn more about what's included when you join us.